What up, everybody? Welcome back to Furrow Publications YouTube channel. On this channel, I talk about zines and DIY publishing. And today, I took a read of AJ Smith's zine on residential schools. Bam! This zine right here is called Residential Schools in History, a zine about residential schools and the impact they had on history and our story. AJ Smith is a really dope zinester. She creates a lot of historical kind of zines, and I like this zine a lot. It's a topic that I read a lot about just because of the fact that I'm also an indigenous person from Central America. So it's very interesting to me because the Central American indigenous experience has been very different than what has been, what's occurred here in the United States as well as in Canada. Going back to a saying that I remember hearing not so long ago, that although we all have our own oppression, every oppression may overlap, but nonetheless is unique in its own right. What I like about this is that AJ tries to stick to the facts, and the information is made readily available, easy to consume, nothing you have to chew on, nothing that you need back information for, nothing like that. And so she just kind of takes you on the course, and the way she situates it from point to point to point, very well done. But let's go ahead and look through this real quick. So to begin with, I love the way it's printed, very humble DIY style, and it's just well put together. The way AJ sets up the whole argument, the way she walks you through everything is just great. So like in the beginning it says here, so what's a residential school? Just in case you don't know. Residential schools were government-sponsored religious schools that were established to assimilate indigenous children into Euro-Canadian culture. And although there were some of these kind of schools in the United States, AJ focuses primarily on the Canadian ones. And a lot of the images I thought were really striking and very powerful to emphasize the points. And some of these points are hard hitting. And I know I've read into this and I've seen movies on this topic and theme. And I know people that went to some of the schools out here in the United States. So some of the things that this talked about that really surprised me was that the last Reformation school closed out in 1996. And that's so recent, man. And that's why when people talk about like getting over certain things, they're speaking from a place where, because they haven't been affected by it, they've assumed that it was over a long time ago. Like not even realizing that here in the United States, a place that is known for religious freedoms, the natives, indigenous people here in the United States didn't even have the right to practice their ceremonies until the 1970s. That's hundreds of years after their proclaimed religious freedoms. And to think that in 1996 they had these schools where children were being molested, malnourished, abused, it's just horrible. And the correlation of like the oppressed, like there's always kind of overlap. Like one of the things that was mentioned in the zine as well was this idea that half of the day was school, the other half was work. And the way they sold this idea, this concept, was that it was basically vocational training. And it wasn't vocational training. We know as well, like in jail and prisons, they call it vocational training, but the reality is it's just cheap labor. It's a new form of slavery, basically. So that was something that I thought was important because I didn't really know that about the reformative schools. And another thing that was mentioned in this that I didn't realize either, in this particular case, the residential schools of Canada, a lot of the indigenous people made a deal with the government kind of backing these schools. And their assumption was that this would help indigenous people kind of assimilate and win in this new Eurocentric world, not realizing that it wouldn't. Not realizing that the treaties they make with the governments, these Eurocentric governments, were not going to be, one, upheld, or two, not necessarily respected the way the indigenous elders probably thought it would be. And that's a sad story in and of itself. I couldn't imagine being one of the elders making the decision, thinking that I'm making the best decision for the youth of my culture and my people, only to then realize that they're dying from beatings and dying from starvation and being raped and molested and all the other horrible things that this zine goes through. So one of the things I like about this is that honestly AJ kind of takes you through like a very, very brief crash course on this topic, but then does recommend other books for you to delve in deeper. These Are My Words is one of them. Fatty Legs is one that really caught my eye that I think I'm gonna try to check out. And then I Am Not a Number. And there goes AJ Smith. People of Color Matter. Here goes her little avatar. Yeah, man, and we'll have a link for her other zines in the show notes. So that is, once again, Residential Schools in History by AJ Smith. I will, as always, have a link in the show notes for you guys, just in case you guys want to check this out. On top of the recommendations that AJ has, I have two that I would recommend to you guys. One is Noam Chomsky's Year 501, The Conquest Continues. That was one of the first books that I read, literally on like indigenous genocide, as well as like a cultural genocide that was being perpetrated against indigenous folks. Really, really recommend that book. The second one was this movie here. That one specifically has to do with residential schools, and it deals with like this, I guess, true story, infamous kind of like a hockey player that basically, because of the abuse that he suffered in these schools, just wasn't ever able to like to fully reach his potential as well as to fully function. And one of the things that I really liked about that movie, that I think it goes hand in hand, it also shows the racism that they still had to face once leaving the schools. And so they were already leaving the schools broken, and then leaving the schools broken into a community that hated them. And it's a very, very sad and interesting movie that I think would further elaborate on this Canadian Indigenous experience. But that's all I got for you guys today, man. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Lates.